All right. Well, Eagle Nation, please join me in welcoming Ryan Holiday to the podcast and to the Zoomcast. Among many things, he's a writer and a media strategist. He's written books that a lot of you have already read, or if you haven't, I'm sure you'll be reading soon, such as The Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, and his most recent work, which is Stillness is the Key. He's also founded The Daily Stoic, which a lot of you are subscribed to, daily inspiration about how to live your lives better. He lives on 40 acres outside of Austin, Texas, and like me, he's learning what the world of agriculture is all about in recent years. So, Ryan, thank you so much for making the time to share some of your wisdom and all the knowledge you've gained, especially over the past decade, with our entire community.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So maybe a good place to start would be, so I've read some of your books over the years, and the first time that you and I met in person was about 15 months ago or so at the Naval Academy, and we were up there. A Navy SEAL named Coleman brought us up there as part of the Naval Academy's leadership conference. Maybe a great place to start off would be like get asked to participate in conversations and give talks and sit on panels and all that. But you said yes to the invitation to go to the Naval Academy. Maybe a great place to start would be that. Like, so why yes to that conversation? And I heard it, of course, on the panel, but would love for you to share with the organization, like what drew you to the Naval Academy for that?
No, it's funny. I was actually just back there. So I think the second to last trip I took before sort of quarantine and lockdown started, I gave a short lecture to the Stockdale Center. It was like a sort of a graduating class kind of a thing. And so it was just starting to be an issue where sort of, people were murmuring about it. And I did not know that was going to be one of my last talks for, who knows how long. My sort of thing when I think about speaking is I have a sort of a couple criteria. One, I think like, is this somewhere that I would learn something from? So I've gotten a lot out of being able to visit sort of elite performing institutions, whether they're sports teams or, Naval Academy or universities or businesses. So I think sort of that. And then I go like, is this a place where delivering my message would be of value? Like people would get something out of it. And then to be sort of fully transparent, the third thing I think about when I weigh speaking, which is somewhat, maybe harder to understand for people who don't do speaking, is I've had to decide, like, I just don't speak for free. Because like you sort of realize, oh, this is what I do. This is my profession. And I've had to get better at sort of deciding where I go, and because you can only go so many places in a year. And what's actually been interesting to me, sort of watching all these gigs that I had for the rest of the year get canceled and spending, I think it's been a month now that I haven't gone anywhere, and it'll be at least another month. It's like, oh wait, this is why I charge when I speak, because I like being at home, right? Like this life that I have is what I want. And so when you go and work, you've got to sort of figure out, is that, worth leaving the family or getting on an airplane? And now everyone, I think this is going to be the new status quo going forward. We're going to have to be asking ourselves, like, we're going to have to be saying, hey, look, there is a real health risk to getting on a plane. I used to get sick all the time when I would travel, but I never thought like, hey, is this worth my health or not? I think that's going to be sort of the next thing people think about when we travel.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to that Naval Academy example, of course, me saying yes to going to the Naval Academy, as an Army graduate, it took, and so one of the reasons why we're talking to Coleman was, hey, Ryan's going to be on this panel. He had some amazing other people there. But what about the Stockdale Center and about like that? And by the way, just, so many people from the military, so many people from the veteran community are drawn to your writing. Yeah. Are drawn to the work, especially these, those latest books. So many of my friends, talked about and quoted to me in some of their leadership challenges, the obstacle is the way. And they quoted, ego is the enemy. Like, what is about you think about the military culture that would draw, and want you to be, to be there speaking to them? Or why do some people from the veteran community, does your work resonate with them?
Well, I'm not sure how much of a function it is of my work, so much as stoicism and then the sort of military community go back 2,300 years, so most of the early Stoics served in some sort of military capacity, just as most prominent citizens of that time did. But but it goes as back to the ancient, as far back as the Greeks and the Romans. And then, Marcus Aurelius spends the vast majority of his reign in some state of war, leading the Roman troops. Flashing forward to Stockdale, who, as he's parachuting into Vietnam, knowing he's going to be taken prisoner, says, "I am entering the world of Epictetus," which is one of the Stoic philosophers that I write about. So I think that the Stoic philosophy tends to overlap a lot with the sort of martial values. When I spoke at the Stockdale Center in February, I talked about the four cardinal virtues of justice, wisdom, courage, and moderation. And then actually here, I'll grab this. Hang on. They gave me this compass when I was there. And they were saying that, like, the sort of, does it say it on here? They told me that the four virtues sort of overlap perfectly with the sort of four military virtues of the academy. So I think there's just a connection to these sort of Stoic principles, this idea of living by a code, sort of operating, alongside some or operating and adhering to some higher principles is obviously sort of what you're doing when you sign up to go somewhere like the Naval Academy.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I just keep coming back to that about how many people that I know that are still serving on active duty or that are part of Team Red, White, and Blue that know about the power and the value of these Stoic ideas that you write about and you talk about in such an effective way. And one of the things, as I know you've heard thousands of times, is just what an excellent job you do translating the really dense work. So I've read, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and boy, I mean, that's not a book that you read like at 10:30 at night when you're getting ready to go to bed, right? Because like, it's just so dense and it's so deep. So yeah, I just would love to hear your thoughts about so how have you managed to make such a craft out of taking such deep and dense work that's been around for hundreds and in some cases thousands of years, and then translating it into our times today, right, where the world is so different with technology and the speed of life and all that. Like, how do you go about doing that?
Well, so the other sort of military talk I gave recently in late January, I gave a talk at Aviano Air Force Base, where I think it's the 31st Fighter Wing. It's a NATO base, but it's primarily a U.S. installment now. It's one of the few bases we have in Europe that's not actually sort of sovereign U.S. territory that we carved out during the Second World War. But I gave a talk there to the leadership and then to about 2,000 airmen and women. And we talked about how, like, look, adversity is a fact of life. What the Stoics sort of talk about is that we don't control what happens, we control how we respond, and that the sort of difficulties that life throws at us are opportunities to be heroic, to do the right thing, to live up to these principles that we hold dear. Well, I think the day after I flew home, the first case of coronavirus landed in Rome, and then it very quickly made its way to northern Italy. And so that base has been essentially besieged, and a big part of the sort of recovery and disaster relief efforts that have been going on there. And I'm supposed to talk to them next week, but again, next week we're going to do a Zoom thing like this. But I think, to me, that's a good example of like, we tend to think of philosophy as this kind of like dusty thing that, as you said, it's like, oh, I've read these books. And that is philosophy. I mean, like, I have Meditations here on my desk. It's an interesting book. There's all sorts of ideas. But the point of real ancient philosophy was that it was supposed to be used in your life, whatever you actually did. So Marcus Aurelius, in one of the sections of Meditations, he says, it stares you in the face. No role is so well suited to philosophy as the one you happen to be in right now. So he's saying that as the emperor, but I read that quote off to these 2,000, airmen and women. And we're sort of connecting that to the ideas of courage and temperance and justice and wisdom. And they probably said, oh, yeah, sure, all roles are suited to philosophy. And then little did they know they would be faced with like a modern plague, a month later, and that all those virtues would be precisely called upon. They would have to be brave. They would have to, put themselves in harm's way for other people. They'd have to follow, sort of strict rules and guidelines, and they'd have to sort of zoom out and get some perspective on it. So what I try to do in my writing is take these ideas, a quote like what Marcus was saying, or these virtues that we're talking about, and then I try to illustrate them with stories, because I think ultimately people learn and remember stories better than just about anything else. And so, like when you said that I translate the Stoics, I think I don't literally translate them. I don't know how to do that, but I can illustrate the ideas in sort of stories and examples and in a framework that I think makes them maybe just easier to consume than, just a book of, Marcus Aurelius' Meditations is basically just a collection of quotes, right? It's not a book in the form that most people think of.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And so less about, translate and more about illustrate. That's a powerful just way to think about a different verb there. But yeah, I mean, you certainly have made a true craft of it. And I think about just, the role of stories like in life, right? I think that, there'll be a lot of stories that emerge from this whole, the coronavirus situation that we're in right now. We see a lot of it going on real time, and we know that there is a ton of stress on everyone's life in different ways, right? There are some people, right, who are working for some companies that are like burning hot. They're on the red line because they're working around the clock in medical community, but also in terms of people getting food and getting all kinds of stuff.
You work at a grocery store, it's all hands on deck right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, right? You go and go in there to do your shopping, and there's people who are sterilized and stuff. I mean, it's it's very, very impressive to see. Then there's other people who are have more time on their hands, right? Because they don't have any customers to talk to or any, so they're able to do work, but they're only able to do so much, right? So it's a very, kind of a very sliding scale from, here to there about tons of stress for one reason or the other. Maybe you're homeschooling your kids, there's all these things. So just to make this, I guess, is just kind of like poignant and applicable as possible for Team Red, White, and Blue members who are watching this, who are listening to this. So as you think about, and I've been reading some of your writing and seeing some of what you're posting, so I know a lot of, these ideas already from following you, but what are some of the most important ideas that we can take away, that we can apply to our lives, immediately, as soon as you hit stop on this or you stop listening to this podcast, some things that you can do, especially in this period of uncertainty over the next, 4, 6, 8 weeks, whatever it is.
Well, so a big one that I'm trying to apply in my life that we're actually doing right now for Daily Stoic, that I was just realizing that I wish I had, I don't know where I put it because I just moved offices, but when I was about 9 years ago, I had lunch with Robert Greene, the author of the 48 Laws of Power, who's my mentor. And I was thinking about what I was going to do next. I was working at this company called American Apparel. It was sort of chaotic and dysfunctional, and I wanted to leave to be a writer. And I was talking to Robert about this, and he said, well, look, you can't leave right now. He's like, there's all these projects you have to do, and you're not quite ready, and you want to save up some money. He's like, but let's say you're going to leave 1 year from today. He's like, the question for you, he's like, is this 1 year going to be a live time or dead time for you? Mm-hmm. And I actually wrote this down, and I wish I could show you, but I wrote it on a piece of note card, or on a note card that's now 9 years old, but I just wrote, dead time, alive time versus dead time. And what the distinction Robert was saying, and I think this is true, again, whether you're working, back-to-back shifts in a grocery store right now, whether you're a doctor or whether you just got furloughed and you don't know if you're going to come back to a job when this is over, the question is okay, you didn't choose this. This is the situation you're in, but how you decide to use this time. What will you, when you look back on this period, let's say you're in quarantine for a month, or let's say it's 2 months, or let's say it's a year. When you look back on that year, the pile of stuff that you have managed to accomplish in that time, and that could be books you've read, movies you've watched, emails you've sent, is your garage cleaner or messier than when you went in? Did you get a promotion at your job? Did you come up with 2 or 3 new ideas? For me, it's going to be word count. How many articles did I write? How much progress did I make on the next book that I'm doing? Did my wife and I decide to use this as an opportunity to sort of reevaluate our finances and make some smart decisions. For you and I, having a little bit of property, it's like, is the land better or worse for the extra days that you spent on it? So I think focusing on deciding that this is going to be a lifetime, you could spend the next month watching Netflix. You could spend the next month, playing video games. You could spend the next month, fighting with whoever you're locked in your house with, right? Like your marriage could emerge better or worse for it. Like you don't control that you're in the situation, but you do control how you decide to use that time. And so that's like the big one that I'm focusing on, that I think is sort of right in the Stoic wheelhouse. And I think, it's perfectly possible that as unfortunate as all of this is, and as much as you would never wish for it to have happened, you could emerge from it better and stronger and more connected to people that you love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I've been following it, in the 14-day challenge, and that's such a powerful phrase, right? Alive time versus dead time. And just that challenge, right? To do that. So speaking of that, so at Team Red, White, and Blue, a huge part of what we do, right, is the power of physical activity, right? Sure. So, and of course, anyone who follows you on Instagram stories knows, right, that like you're a big runner. I mean, you swim, you bike, you move
Swimming
your body
is the one thing I haven't been able to do as much. Like we have a pool at our house, but it's not very long. So the one thing that's unfortunate, not one thing, but the thing I've struggled with is that I can't get in a pool and swim laps, which to me is like almost the perfect therapy for a stressful situation like this. But I have, I usually try to run every day. I've sort of tweaked my schedule now. So one of the reasons we're recording it at 10:30, which is somewhat unusual time, is like I need to get home by 12:15. I have a small office down the street from my house. I get home and I take my son. My son seems to only sleep when he's moving in some way. That means the car, the bike trailer, or a running stroller. And so like every day for the last 30 days, we have done that at lunchtime or right after lunchtime. Yeah. So I take a walk with my kids every morning. So this morning I strapped my youngest son in like the baby carrier and the other one in the stroller. And we did about 3.5 miles and then came home and had breakfast. And then I got to work, and then I'm going to go home and do the, I think we'll do the bike today. But yeah, I think you could emerge from this in better shape than you went into it, right? Which is a positive, but also the act of getting active and getting outside and sort of getting those endorphins is a great way to process the stress and frustration. Like I've not ever left on a run and not come back feeling better. I might feel physically worse, but mentally and spiritually, I always feel way better.
Yeah. And that's such a powerful thing that, we see, and we hear about this from everybody, right? Especially, our veterans who at one point in their military careers, they had to exercise 5 days a week. And, that's a big part of our mission is how do we get veterans, to become active again, if they have lost that habit in their life. And again, one of the things that's so impressive from my observations of you is just the consistency at which you bring physical activity, right? And I think you kind of hold yourself accountable by taking a picture of your watch, and all that. But like, can you speak to like, is there any sort of the value? Because I'm guessing there is, but like from the Stoics and from the work that you do professionally, and how does it help you to keep and maintain those habits? Because that's the drum that I'm beating with Team Red, White, and Blue is really the importance of healthy habits, right? For veterans. And we know that like if you run once a week or even twice a week, like that's better than nothing at all.
Sure.
But you're not really drawing the benefits if you're not getting out there and moving your body for at least 30, 45 minutes or so on a consistent daily basis. Like what is it from all the work and the research you've done, right, that has helped to translate into that habit and that practice in your life?
What's interesting, actually, one of the early Stoics, his name was Chrysippus, was actually an elite level distance runner. I'm forgetting the word. It was a strange kind of a race. They didn't do a lot of distance running in ancient Greece. They did this. It was a 3-mile race in about 200-meter segments. So it's basically like wind sprints for 3 miles. So you can imagine just this sort of intense difficulty of that physically, but how perfectly it overlaps with philosophy, right? Like like, I think one of the things you learn in distance sports or endurance sports is that your mind or your body wants you to stop, but you have to cultivate this sort of the will and the mental fortitude to push past whatever those reservations are. And that's really difficult. And so for me, one of the real benefits of physical exercise is that it prepares you for situations precisely like this. Like, this is a thing that's going on longer than expected. There's no end in sight. You wish it was over, but you have no option but to keep going. One of my favorite books is by Haruki Murakami, and it's called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. And he's a great novelist, and he wrote this book about running. And he was saying running is both an exercise and a metaphor. So for him, the process of running every day is kind of a metaphor for the training and the practice of writing every day. And so I kind of think about it that way. It's like every day I try to go on a walk, I try to do some reading, I try to do some writing, and I try to do some strenuous physical activity. So like those are kind of the tent poles that I build my day around. So it's like, I could have I could have a really crappy day writing, but I'm always going to have a good day because I ran. And like you sort of don't control like the muses or the inspiration of writing. It's a very unpredictable profession. Just like if you were a stock trader, there'd be up days and down days, or if you owned a retail store, there'd be good days and bad days, but the run is always good, right? Or the exercise is good. And so I try to make sure that I do that every day. I do like the idea of holding yourself accountable, the Jocko thing of taking a picture. I try to take a picture every day of it just as like sort of proof to myself that I did it. But I don't post it as an Instagram post. I post it as a story in my Instagram because I like the idea that it disappears every 24 hours. You have to do it every day. And so for me, the marathon is not like, hey, I'm training to run 26 miles. The marathon is I run or swim or bike every day.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah. And I think about just how important that is. Again, I like that example, that metaphor of life. I kind of use that a lot of times as I train for marathons, right? Yeah. You got long, slow distance days, and you got tempo days, and then you've got, interval days, and and sometimes life requires all of those, right? Sometimes you just got to keep at it for a long period of time.
Sometimes you have to rest too, which is an important part of the training too, that's actually the hardest part for me is like, it's often easier for me to run. Like, let's say I'm not feeling well. It's often easier for me to push through and run even though I'm sick, because I get anxious or I get, I'm so sort of wrapped up in it. It often takes more self-discipline for me to go like, today I'm going to take care of myself and I'm going to rest than it is to sort of push it through. So I think what I just love about it is that it challenges you from all different directions. And it's just good to have that sort of space in your life.
I love that. And that's a perfect tee up for your most recent work, right? Okay. The stillness is the key. And, I talked to Cal Newport about this recently. As you know, I co-authored a book, about the role of solitude in leadership. Sure. And as you think about this idea of stillness, you think about this idea of rest, and you teed it again, just perfectly, because it is sometimes the hardest, but also arguably the most valuable part of an entire training plan is how effectively do you rest, right?
Yep.
And so as you think about, again, because this book has, I guess, been less than a year now since it's been out, I read it in the late fall period. So we'll be curious, of all the ideas that you wrote about in there, that again, I encourage everyone from Team Red, White, and Blue to go out and check out this book. I think of all of your works. I mean, The Obstacles Away is like just super powerful. Ego is the Enemy is like, it is very good because it is so easy, especially those of us in the military, to have bigger egos. We love to kind of, talk trash with each other, and you can see how that plays out. But I just feel that Stillness is the Key was so timely. If that had, I know there was a trilogy, right? It was intended to come last, but had it come first, I feel like it was meant to be that it came out when it did because of the time period we find ourselves in right now. Yeah. Can you just talk a little bit about the concept, and then again, going back to that, is there a specific story within the book that you think is the most illustrative right now for what we can learn or glean from that as we kind of navigate the future here?
Well, I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I was thinking about Churchill. Sort of Churchill gets driven out of power in the early 1930s. He's sort of too disruptive. There's some baggage from the First World War. This sort of pacifist ideas and appeasement is the sort of the trend of the day. And so he's basically driven out of public life. And this lasts for almost 10 years. And there were probably moments where he felt that was the absolute worst thing that could have ever happened to him, how unfair it was, how awful it was, all the things he would do differently if he was in power, how he would have, wished he could change things. But it turns out that 10 years was exactly not just what Winston Churchill needed to rest, to think big picture, to sort of be, apart from the train wreck that was politics of his time, but it was setting him up for his moment with destiny, right? And sort of saves all of the Western world as a result of this period. And I was thinking about that this morning. Actually, I was just writing about it. If we think about this idea of a alive time, dead time, obviously no one would choose to be locked up in their house for 2 months or 3 months or whatever it is. No one would choose not to have all their business disappear or their clients get paused, or, if you're a wedding planner right now, you can't put on wedding. All doesn't matter what you do, you were disrupted by this. So that is unfortunate. But what we can focus on, what we can think about, what we can try to emulate is how Churchill uses this period. This is where Churchill comes up with his Churchill is able to see the bigger picture that all the politicians who were in power were unable to see.
Right.
And I was thinking about this morning, it's like, look, there's a lot less to manage right now because you don't have to go there. But what you should do is use that time to make and to think and to plan and to learn as much as possible so that when normal life does resume, you are in a great position, right? And that you have benefited from this period. And so when we think about this idea of stillness, we might think that that's not being active. What it really means is that you're just less active in things that don't matter. You sort of slowed things down. You've quieted the noise. Maybe you stepped away from the crowd a little bit, but your mind is active in a way that it's never been active before. And so I think that's how I'm trying to use this period. And that's what I think people should think about it. And I think that's important too with your book. Like when you're saying solitude, you're not saying go lock yourself up in a cabin and veg out in front of the television, right? Like you're saying that it's actually in solitude that leaders have a chance to reflect, to think about where things are going, to lay out their vision, to get in touch with themselves. Like this is a wonderful time to do a lot of that. It's forced, sure, but we can, as the Stoics say, sort of assent to that and then decide to use it to our advantage.
Yeah, that's such powerful advice. And if you think about it, almost the potential, right? If enough people are doing this in this period of time, think about sort of like the Renaissance or the boom that could emerge on the other end of this, right? Where enough people have said, hey, I used to do this. I used to be so busy doing all this stuff. And now I'm going to repurpose it here. But then someone who knows what massive idea they come up with, right? In this period of stillness where they're able to just spend that time reflecting on, and they come up with this brilliant, plan, right, that they hatch, on the second half of the year.
No, I think regardless of where you are politically, I don't think it's controversial to say that what we're currently doing is not working. Civically, culturally, politically, our system has ground to a halt. And the kinds of leaders we need, we don't have. Most importantly, what the kinds of vision and ideas and sort of foresight that we need from our leaders is clearly desperately missing. I mean, we wouldn't be in this mess right now if people had been able to take some time to step back and reflect and prepare and, sort of imagine some worst case scenarios to build up sort of political capital, all the things you need in crises. And so one of the things I really hope that comes out of this is that people emerge sort of ready to be leaders, whether that's running for a local school board, whether it's deciding to start your own community organization, maybe it's to start a business, or maybe it's to run for office or to do something like you're doing with Team Red, White, and Blue. It is how can people take this time to sort of sit with themselves, to think about the state of the world and really sort of wrestle with how you can contribute and make a difference. Because we've got to like, if you think about the last year, we had crazy wildfires, we had flooding, we've had a whole bunch of sort of civic tension. Now we have a global pandemic. We've got international, skirmishes that are breaking out. We have climate change. We have all sorts of enormous, universal, intractable problems that somebody is going to have to solve. And so a moment like this is precisely when, we need future leaders to be sort of really putting in the work and thinking and planning for how they can be a part of the solution. What we shouldn't do is go back, when this is all over and just everyone's back a part of the problem again.
Yeah. Let's get back to normal. The status quo is
normal is not working.
Yeah. That's really great. One more topic of conversation before we wrap it up. And so a lot of people, in Team Red, White, and Blue, obviously, again, I got my stack of books over here, the Daily Stoic, the daily emails that come. And I've actually talked to my brother and a whole bunch of other people I know about this. You're one of your newest initiatives called the Daily Dad.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm looking forward to hopefully contributing some thoughts. That's on my list of things that
I sent you that, right?
You did. So
okay, good.
I gotta make sure I'm spending some time thinking about, to make sure that I add some significant value that's different, than what's been stated so far. But I think what's really interesting, not just about right now in COVID, but even just in general, I talk about this a lot over the past 5, 6, 7 years. There's just been, a smashing together of our personal and our professional lives. So you're talking right now, hey, you got an office right down the road, but like, obviously a lot of people right now are working from home, right?
Sure.
And even when this does go back, hopefully to somewhat normal, there's always going to be this mashup of our personal and professional lives because our phones, they follow us around. We can do email. So all that. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on, so why, number one, why Daily Dad, right? Why did you come up with that? And then two, as you think about like its future and the role that it can play, like, why do you think, for parenting, but specifically in this case for dads, like that, the value of stoicism and then other ideas like that you weave into there, like the practical advice from other people. Why is that so important, do you think, in the world, both right now of COVID, but also just in general in the information age? Why is it so important to be thinking about these things the way that you're sharing via a Daily Dad?
Yeah, so I created Daily Dad, and it's dailydad.com, and I think at Daily Dad on most of the social platforms. But so when my son is about 3.5, and then my other son is a little less than 1. But I remember when my wife got pregnant, you go and you sort of read a bunch of the books, and the problem is you just like, even if you do make it all the way through to the end, which most of the time you don't, I didn't like this idea that it's like you're supposed to read it once and then it, because you don't know. It's like, even what you expect when you're expecting, right? Like you read it when your wife's 3 months pregnant, and then, you're like, so you're past the 3 months, and then you're reading about the next 6 months, which you can read about, but you really have no idea, right? And so it doesn't work as like a day-to-day thing. And so what I found with the Daily Stoic, which is really cool, is like, it's this idea that you read 1 page a day, every day, and you sort of loop back through it. And this is how people study the Torah. This is how people study the Bible, even church, like, or a jujitsu gym. If you go in any church or any jujitsu gym in the country, if they were open right now, and the teachers would be cycling, the teachers of the pastor would be cycling through teachings. Like eventually they make it to the end, and then they just start back over again. And so what I wanted to do with Daily Dad was create like the idea that like what a father of a 1-year-old versus a parent of a 40-year-old, they're still on the same journey. Like the job never really stops. And there's different ways to apply the advice, but it is an ongoing lifetime thing. And so I wanted to create it where it's just something you get every day. Eventually I'll do a book about it, but something that you read every day. And it just sort of reminds you of the principles or the ideas or the lessons that you're trying to do at this thing that you're trying to get better at, that, if we're being honest, is really our most important job. And so that's what I was trying to do with the project. And it's been really fun. It's been one of my favorite things to write. And I just find personally that writing is a good way for me to learn and remind myself of what I think. So like I'm sort of learning as I'm doing it. But I do think you make a good point, and it's something I wrestle with, like the where does sort of like personal and professional begin and end. It's hard. And I think now that we're all locked in our houses, it makes it harder. You know, my wife, I'll be like, you know, you've been gone all day. And I'll be like, what are you talking about? I've been here all day. And she's like, no, you actually haven't been here. And so that's something that I'm certainly trying to work on. That's something I talk about in the Stillness book. And this is as good a time as any to practice. Like, can you actually be where you are and do what you're doing and not be thinking of other things while you're doing it? And I think the irony is this is something really important that you owe your kids. Like, you owe your kids to be present and to be fully engaged with whatever you're doing. And then the irony is they're really good at teaching you that, because your kids are always fully engaged and present because they don't have a million worries and, you know, cares to think about. They really just want to play in the dirt, or, you know what I mean? Like, and so that's something I'm always trying to practice and learn from, because it's really hard to turn off being a writer, as you know, or turn off being a boss or being an entrepreneur, because it's just, your strength is in kind of a weakness because it's just always operating there in the background.
Yeah. One of the quotes someone shared with me before was, you know, people often write the books that they need to read.
Of course.
So, you know, like that is, I think it's very practical and sort of someone like you I saw your post just recently, you know, I think you've written 9 books or something in like the past, like 9 or 10 years. Like that's absurd. But,
no, I definitely don't feel like, I think there's some writers who have gone and figured out things, and then they are coming back to you with that knowledge. And I like a lot of those books. And then there's fiction where the author is sort of creating some universe from their imagination. And then I think there's the books that I try to write, which is I'm trying to figure something out, and I'm kind of talking to you and to myself as I figure it out. Because I definitely don't think I've mastered overcoming obstacles. I certainly have not mastered my ego, and I've definitely, you know, don't have enough stillness in my life. But I think by focusing on those things and saying, hey, I'm going to spend the next 2 years, you know, tackling this thing, it does give me a sort of a framework or an understanding of something that, you know, I do want to prioritize in my life.
Yeah, it's so powerful to be dedicating so much time and mental energy to be thinking about and then writing about these things. You know, one of my mentors from back in my time at West Point, Jim Collins, right? He had a line that I'll never forget. It actually changed my life when he said it. Because I was talking to him, at the time I was, I think 34, 35 years old. And he says, you know, really when you're on the path, you know, in life to having like this big impact into greatness, the starting line is age 50. And I remember being like, it kind of like just stopped me cold. Cause like, I was thinking about like, hey, but you're like, I got to do this and I've got to do that. And all these big things that I got to do. And it was and he started cycling through like Bill Gates, boom, 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 like all these people. And you're like, you know, like, wow, like, holy cow. Like, I mean, this wasn't just his opinion. He's a big stats guy. He's like massively analytical. So he didn't just like pull it out of thin air. Like he had like analyzed all the data and kind of looked at people and seen that like kind of everything you do up until age 50 is trying to figure a lot of stuff out. And then as you kind of turn, if you've done it right, 50 to 75 is where you're drawing on all of that experience, all of that knowledge, all of those relationships that you've built and you've worked for from that next chapter of your life.
No, I think not only is that probably factually true, but I think from an ego perspective, it's really great, right? And it's something I try to think about. This idea of staying a student and to never sort of declare yourself having arrived or having mastered something. And so like for me, I sort of the way I think about it is that all the books that I'm writing and all the writing I'm doing and all the things that I'm learning are setting me up for some book or project that I can't even conceive of, where sort of time and my track record and my skills will come together perfectly. And the example that I do, that I use for this is someone like Michael Lewis. In 2008, Michael Lewis wrote The Big Short, which was like, you would not think that a book about the financial crisis could be remotely entertaining, could be remotely educational, and could really have any impact. And because he'd spent a lifetime as an author, and I actually think, I think his book Liar's Poker is amazing. I think The Blind Side is amazing. I think Moneyball is amazing. Those are all really good books, but they lack something that The Big Short has, which I think is the right moment and decades of experience. And so that's something that keeps me going, but I also feel like keeps me humble, is that, hey, these books are good, but I should remind myself that this is only the best of what I'm capable of right now.
Yeah.
And that at some point, and again, we were talking about Churchill. I think Churchill was like 65 or 70 when World War II breaks out. And he had served in government for decades. He'd held almost every position imaginable in British life. Everyone thought his career was over, but in fact, all of that was prologue for his great moment. And I think, obviously, this is the timeless story of veterans, which is, think about all the great leaders in the Second World War who had been, sort of heroes in the First World War. These were decades of experience. They maybe thought their career was on the decline. They thought that their best moments had already come and gone, but in fact was setting them up for, when the world needed them most. And so, yeah, I think if you just tell yourself, I'm always preparing, I'm always getting better, I'm always making progress, and my moment will come, not only does that keep you going, but it keeps you humble, I think.
Yeah. And just one quick story on that, as we wrap, is, General Eisenhower, and this is something that we talked about a lot when Jim Collins would come out and visit. He was fascinated by Eisenhower.
Me too.
And it was until 1935 that he was a major, right? So he graduated in the West Point class in 1915. He had done 20 years, essentially a very just average military career, right?
Sure.
But he was working hard. He was doing all these kinds of things, and he was essentially carrying MacArthur's bags for him in like 1935 and 36. And he basically went from 04 to 010, right? From major to Supreme Allied Commander in like 7.5 years, right? And you think about,
and I actually think he went from there's a period of like 18 months where he's promoted like 5 times. He basically goes from like ordinary general to the most powerful military leader in the entire world, like that. And that's because he cultivated his relationships with someone like George Marshall. That's because he paid his dues. And I think what's even more incredible about the Eisenhower story there is like Eisenhower misses out on the Spanish-American War, which Marshall was able to serve in. He misses out in World War II. He basically World War I. He spends World War I in like Kansas, or Georgia. And then his main accomplishment was he was on a commission that put up memorials for the soldiers who had fought in World War I. Across Europe, and so he missed out on all of that. He spent chunks in the Philippines and South America. He did not know what fate was preparing him for, but he did it all, and he didn't complain, and he stuck with it. And then when time and opportunity collided, he was ready, I think.
Yeah, and I would sum up by saying, as we talk to veterans throughout Team Red, White, and Blue, that is a big part of our message, is that your military service is over, and now you've moved on to other careers and other things in your life. But it's not necessary to look back and say those were my best days, right? It's the challenge of how do you realize that those days when you were wearing the uniform, they were, and hopefully in many cases, great. They were challenging. They were certainly memorable, maybe chaotic, depending on how many deployments you went on. But at the end of the day, as you look forward, because most people retire from the military or they leave the military between age 22 and age like 42 or 45. And that's not even to that beginning, that age 50 that Collins talks about, right? So it's really like you have this 20, 30, hopefully if you're fortunate enough to have your health, years in front of you. And it's not to sit there and to look back and say my best days are behind me, but by practicing and learning from the Stoics, by building in that consistency, like I see you live out in your life, like if we can get more veterans to do that, like it can have this, I think, huge seismic impact on the future of our communities and our country, going back to the point you made a little while ago, which is we've got these massive leadership challenges that are facing our country, that are facing our world, that are facing our families, that are facing our communities. And we need people who have who are not afraid to look in the mirror, right, and see what's looking back at them, like helping to step up and to lead those. And a lot of those are men and women, right, who have served in the military. And so my hope is that, more of our members, more of our veterans dig into the work and the philosophy and everything that you've done and draw upon that for strength and for clarity and for guidance as they move forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And yeah, nobody has the skills that they have been, the greatest army in the history of the world spent millions of dollars training all the people who are listening to this in a special set of skills and to a special code and a special way of living, and that we need probably more than ever. And I was reminded of I'm forgetting the guy's name, but I just saw he's going to be given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, or whatever that highest civilian honor is. Mm-hmm. He was that PE teacher in Seattle, I think, or was it Portland? But anyways, in the Northwest, he was a great high school football player, a great college football player. He basically he didn't know that his highest the peak of his career would be he played for Oregon. I think he scores a touchdown. Then he gets cut from one NFL team, cut from another NFL team. Then he becomes an NFL assistant coach. He gets cut from that. Basically an unending series of sort of declines. He finds himself as basically an assistant PE teacher at his old high school. He can't possibly be pleased or happy with himself. And then one day the principal asks if he would go, send grab a student from a classroom in this sort of annex area of the school. And as he walks in, he bumps into a student who's walking into the classroom with a shotgun, who's about to commit a school shooting. And this guy tackles him and he hugs the kid and he prevents this kid from doing this horrible thing. And he couldn't, his mom had always said to him, every time he was upset, everything that happened his whole life, she would always say, you're just where you're supposed to be. You're right where you're supposed to be. And he never thought that he didn't think that he knew what that meant. He didn't agree. And so he didn't know that his fate was preparing him to be exactly where people needed him to be at that moment. And I think, again, things are dark, things are not great. A lot of people are dealing with problems. Maybe you're not where you want to be in your life right now. That's one way to think about it. The Stoics would say, hey, maybe actually this is preparing you for something you can't even conceive of yet, that's difficult to anticipate, but is in fact exactly where you need to be and exactly where the world needs you to be.
Yeah, I love that. And putting a bow on it, I just got to tie it together with the book that I'm reading with my son right now. He just turned 10. I know you're a big believer in this about reading, especially books with your kids, is The Alchemist.
Yeah, of course.
By Paulo Coelho, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And just a sort of powerful book, and be able to have that perspective, to know, right, that things are preparing you for where you need to be. And that message you just drove home in this conclusion, I think, is so powerful and something that we all need to hear. I know I certainly need the reminders, to be able to hear it even in my own life. And so, sure. Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you carving out the time and the energy to share with us and inspire Team Red, White, and Blue. So
thanks, man.
I hope you have a great rest of the day, and look forward to continuing to follow the journey. And just thanks again for what you did.
Yeah, I'll see you in person when we can.
That's it.
All right.
Take care.